Great. Okay, I'm going to start with the kibbeh recipe. I'm going to read through the ingredients, read through the equipment, and then we'll start cooking. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is some fine bulgur wheat. Bulgur is this fancy thing here. It's called cracked wheat. If you're gluten-free, you can't use it. Like if you're a celiac, don't even think about it because it's cracked wheat. It's just a different form of cracked wheat. And the way that we make the outside of our kibbeh relies on a little bit of gluten in this cracked wheat. Sometimes we can use quinoa for things as a replacement, but not this recipe. Well, I haven't tested the recipe with quinoa, so you can always have a go at that, but I personally haven't tested making quinoa, making the kibbeh with quinoa. I'm just saying that because like I have a gluten-free diet as much as I can. And so, you know, what we eat for people who are gluten-free is, you know, it impacts us a little bit more. All right, we've got fine bulgur wheat. You'll need some water. You'll need an onion. You'll need some coriander, ground coriander. You'll need some ground cinnamon, some black pepper, some salt, and some oil. In itself, not a lot of ingredients, and I love this recipe. It's so much fun. Anyway, we'll get into it. For the meat filling, you'll need some olive oil, onion, some minced beef or lamb, some pine nuts, allspice, cinnamon, salt and pepper. The equipment, you'll need some measuring cups and measuring spoons, a strainer. If you've got a bigger one, like a metal one, that's probably a bit easier. A large bowl, a food processor, a frying pan, some baking paper, and some tongs. All right, fantastic. Let's get into it. Oh, wait, did I just mess that around? Now, this recipe says to cover a fine mesh strainer with a light cloth like cheesecake. To be honest, I've never done it like that before. I have simply added the bulgur to a bowl with some boiling water. So if you want to stick your kettle on first and boil that, you can. We'll do it. Yep, we're going to boil our kettle. I'm going to pop it into our food processor. I'm just taking the skin off it easily. That to my food processor. So we've popped down to the kibbeh at the moment. We're putting the onion, the meat, which is about 750 grams of minced beef or lamb, depending on what you've used. I've got a kilo here, so I'm going to use about 750 grams. And I'm going to pop that into my food processor. Plastic. Then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of allspice. 2 teaspoons of allspice. So we've got 2 teaspoons of allspice. and 1 teaspoon of ground coriander, 2 teaspoons of allspice, 1 teaspoon of ground coriander, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, so we've got 2 teaspoons of ground allspice, 1 teaspoon of ground coriander, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Then we've got 1 teaspoon of black pepper. So 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and I'm going to let you guys be the judge of how much, if you're grinding your pepper, how much you need of that, because the ground pepper, the freshly ground pepper has a little bit more flavour to it, so we don't need to add as much. Oops, salt. And it says a pinch of salt. I would say 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. A pinch is too, like, who knows what it is? It's a little bit too difficult. So a pinch of salt. All right. Once you've done that, we're going to go to our wheat. I'm going to grab a bowl. All right. I'm going to do it a little bit of a different way. I'm going to do it the way that I normally do it, because I'm more confident to do it the way I want to do it. All right, 2.5 cups of bulgur, however you say it, cracked wheat, 2.5 cups. And I've got fine bulgur wheat. I don't know about anyone else, but I couldn't find it at the grocery store. I had to go to the fruit market, my local fruit market, to do that. See if the pack. All right. So 2.5 cups of the wheat straight into the bowl. One, 2.5. And then I'm going to measure the exact same amount of boiling water. So I've got, just be really super careful. So I've got my measuring cup on the table or on the bench, so that I'm not trying to hold it up in the air and trying to pour boiling water. 1, 2, 1.5. And I'm going to give that a nice little mix around. And then as soon as I've mixed it around to, like, it's a little bit watery, that's fine. I'm going to put a plate on top. Put a plate on top so to trap in the heat. And then I'm going to pop that at the side. All right, girls, you do need a little bit more. Sorry. So add another 2 cups of water. If you've got it in your kettle, another, you just need double. So you might need to boil your kettle again. But the wheat is going to take up all that water and it'll expand. I need to put my kettle on for a little bit longer. Great. So in the meantime, that's just sitting there doing its thing. And then I'm going to process our meat and our spices. So we don't want it, you want it to be a paste. Okay. Once you've done that, then we're going to work on the filling. So the first thing that we're going to do is to saute our onion, and actually first thing we're going to do is toast our pine nuts. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, you'll only need 1/3 cup of pine nuts, and you won't even need any oil at all. So I'm turning my pan onto a medium heat. We don't want to burn our pine nuts. I'm literally going to pop them in. No oil, just a flat, if you've got a non-stick pan, that would be ideal. And golden, beautiful. This won't take very long, probably less than a minute. Really quickly doing that. And as soon as they start to get nice and golden, give them a toss, let them go, and then as soon as they're golden, then straight away take them off the heat. That went well. Right. Beautiful. And then you're going to start, we're going to add our onion and cook till golden. We're sauteing, that's the word I'm looking for, sauteing. So you'll need a little bit of olive oil, a tablespoon of olive oil in the bottom of the pan. And this, remember, this is for our filling, so we don't want our pieces of onion to be too big. Take that little bit of extra time to chop them up. Sometimes just 30 seconds more of chopping something up is going to get a different result. Oops, a daisy. I've got a slippery onion here. So I've got this big chunky bit here. All right, so a tablespoon of oil. I'm going to add my onions. Beautiful. And then straight after that, we're going to add our minced lamb, about half a kilo of minced lamb or beef, depending on what you're using. Stirring those around. Beautiful. I've got my meat ready to go. I'm using a lamb filling and beef on the outside. If your onion starts to caramelize, turn your heat down. And we're going to start breaking up our meat. I'm hanging onto my saucepan so it doesn't jump around. Once your meat has been browned, I'm going to turn the heat down a bit. Add my pine nuts. Move them around a bit. Yum. And you really want your meat to be broken up. You don't want big chunks. So use the tip of your spatula or your spoon to break up any big chunks that you might have. You add your pine nuts, and then the next thing we're going to add is 1 teaspoon more of ground spice. 1 teaspoon. Beautiful. 1 teaspoon of ground spice and half a teaspoon of cinnamon. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm double checking that I've got the right spoons. Beautiful. Closing my lids as I go along. So we've added our pine nuts, 1 teaspoon of ground allspice, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. We want some more black pepper. Let's say half a teaspoon of ground black pepper, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. We want to bring out the flavors of those beautiful spices. All right. Once you've stirred all of your mixture in together, we need our mixture to cool down. So I'm going to put my mixture into another wide bowl so that it will cool down. It's probably a ridiculous size, but I'm going to scrape as much as possible. Excellent. And I'm pushing it up the sides of my bowl because I want that to cool down. And the more surface area it has, the more it'll cool down, or the faster it'll cool down. All right, then I'm going to pop that at the side. And we're going to need our food processor again. So I'm taking the meat that was in the food processor and I'm going to add it to a nice big bowl. And it's a nice big bowl. And I'm letting the water drain from my chickpeas just to make sure that they're okay. Great. Then I'm going to add them to my food processor. Perfect. Then you'll need a cup of, it says cilantro. Cilantro, of course, is coriander. So you'll need, it says a cup of fresh parsley leaves and 3/4 of a cup of fresh coriander leaves. So that's 1 3/4 of a cup of fresh herbs. 1 3/4 of a cup of fresh herbs. I try to chop up as much as I can, just to make it easier for the machine. Now, if you can see any big stalks, take any of your big stalks out because nobody wants those. We just want the leaf. The leaf's got the flavour in it. So if you do see any big stalks, just remove them. I'm just doing a little double check here, a little bit of a toss through. So we've got, oh, it smells amazing already. So I'm adding my herbs. So you've got 1 cup of fresh parsley, and you don't have to be specific. So this is one of those recipes that you can be pretty flexible with. We've got 1 cup of fresh parsley leaves, 3/4 of a cup of fresh coriander leaves, 1/2 cup of dill if you're using it, 1/2 cup of dill. And then you'll need a small onion just quartered. Or if you've got a big onion, just half of a really big onion. We're using all of it, but because we're using a food processor, the food processor breaks it down for us. But it's just making it a little bit easier. So 1 small onion or 1/2 a big onion. And then we've got 7 to 8 garlic cloves. 7 to 8 garlic cloves. You don't really need to even, I mean, you do need to peel them. If you're using minced garlic, sometimes I use minced garlic, but on this occasion, I really want that flavour of the beautiful fresh garlic. All I'm doing here is squashing using the back of my hand and the flat part of the knife. You can use, as you know, that I'm happy to use the salt shaker as well. Anything to make my life easier. So I'm squashing it. And when you squash, oh, about to add the skins. When you squash your garlic, you're releasing the oils and you're also usually releasing the garlic out of the skin. 7 to 8 garlic cloves. We're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt half a teaspoon of salt. We don't want to have a bland falafel mixture. Half a teaspoon of salt. One tablespoon of black pepper. That's quite a lot, 1 tablespoon. This is all about flavour. One tablespoon of black pepper. One tablespoon of ground cumin. And make sure that you're smelling everything as you pop it in, so you're becoming familiar with all of the flavours. 1 tablespoon, oh yummo, of cumin. My cumin ran out, so I'm going to give it a little bit more. One tablespoon of cumin, 1 tablespoon of ground coriander. One tablespoon of ground coriander. Again, smell it. Oh, yum, yum, yum. Full of flavour. 1 tablespoon of ground coriander. 1 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, if you're using it. 1 teaspoon of ground of cayenne pepper, 1 teaspoon. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So this is to make our falafel nice and fluffy. 1 teaspoon of baking powder. No, actually, we're not meant to add that now, but anyway, it's in there. And then once you've done that, let me double, triple check. Add the chickpeas, herbs, onions, garlic and spices to the bowl of a food processor. Run the food processor for 40 minutes at a time until when well combined and the mixture is starting to form like together. You will find that it's a little bit grainy. So don't think it's going to be like a smooth paste like our meat. It's going to look different. So I'll show you once I've done mine. So let's process them. Beautiful. And then we're going to pop it into the fridge while we make our kibbeh. So if you want to put your lid on or a plate on top even, neat, but we want it to be a little bit cooler. So I want to put mine onto like a big wide tray. All right, I'm just going to So ideally you shouldn't have any water at the bottom. So I'm putting it into a wide bowl, and all we're doing here is we just want it to cool down a bit. I just don't want it to add it to the meat quite yet. So I'm opening it up a bit. Great, and just letting that air flow through it. I feel like I've got it everywhere. Anyone else? So all we're doing there is we're letting it cool down a bit. Great. All right, let's start grating our cucumber. I've got a little, what do you call this, sieve? I've got a little sieve that I'm going to grate my cucumber into. If you want to, it's a bit difficult to see. My things in my house disappear to weird and wonderful other places. And we want to get rid of some of the juice or the liquid from the cucumber. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, just mixing that, giving it a toss. And even already it started to, the liquid to come out. And so what's happening here, if anyone can remember this, this is called osmosis. Osmosis. So it's when salt goes into the cells, it causes the liquid to go out. And when we add sugar, it does the opposite. So all we're doing here is we're going to drain our cucumber once you've grated it and put it at the side. We'll come back to that at the end. So the next part, and I'm absolutely not rushing anybody, we've got a plate that when we make our finished kibbeh. So I've got a plate and I've got my bowl of water. I've got my filling that I'm about to use. Because you're not on my screen here. Oh, excellent, excellent. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to add our bulgur to our meat. So yes, as I just literally put it all over. Yes, I love how that happens. And then what we're going to do is, this is definitely, I've got one hand and I'm going to start mixing my meat into my bulgur. Now I know it's a little bit warm, but we're going to fix that up in a minute. So we need to mix it into, like, it becomes a dough. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a section, or like a handful, and then I'm going to put the rest of it into the refrigerator because I want it to keep cold. Gosh. So I've taken a section out and then I'm going to put the rest of my bowl into the fridge. All right. So dampen your hands with some water and take about 2 tablespoons of the dough. I've probably got too much here. Now remember, it's going to take us a little while to get this. Whenever you do something for the first time, now this is the way I do it. If you've got another way of doing it, great. Then I'm taking a piece of filling, a spoonful of filling into the middle, and then I'm closing it up. Great. And I'm going to make the traditional kibe shape, and it will take you a little while to get this. So so it's kind of like a football shape. So this is a really bad example, but this is kind of where we're going. We've got the filling in the middle. It's not too bad, not too bad on the screen. Up close, it's not that fantastic, but we've kind of got a little, and I'm rolling it back and forward to get a nice smooth on the outside. And then you can, now, and you can do as big or a small kibe that you want to do. And after a while, you will get the knack of it. And you'll figure out how much filling to pop inside. So you want to seal it up. And if it's like my one just broke underneath, so therefore you can easily seal it, but you need it to be sealed because we're going to fry them. Fantastic. Oh, look at us go. All right, anyone else getting the knack? Perfect. I'm going to pop mine in the fridge. As you do those, guys, what I'm going to do is show you how to make, well, show you how to make the tzatziki, which is crazy, ridiculously easy. So you can see sort of that I've got a bit of liquid from my cucumber, and I'm going to squeeze that out. So I want to get as much liquid, and I'm squeezing it. And I'm squeezing it through the sieve because that just helps me get a little bit more. You don't need that, so you can throw that liquid out. And we're going to keep, yeah, there we go. We're going to keep the cucumber. And all of you girls are capable of doing this on your own. So I'm just showing you because I know that, Mia, you're not making falafels so right now, so you're free to leave after that if you want to. All right, so we've got our cucumber and I've squeezed it out I squeezed all the liquid out, so now we're left with a lot more, it's still moist, but it's not like gluggy or soggy is probably a better word. I'm going to add half a teaspoon of minced garlic. Half a teaspoon of minced garlic. A pinch of salt, which is about 1/8 of a teaspoon. 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Some dried mint, or if you've got fresh mint, great. Dried mint. Yum. So a pinch of dried mint. A teaspoon of olive oil. Which my olive, that's not olive, but that'll do. A teaspoon of olive oil. And then mix all of that up so that it's, and then you can add half a cup of yogurt. And this recipe here, you can make as much, you can do it in whatever quantities you want to do it in. So if you want to add more yogurt or more cucumbers, it's one of those things that families have their own way of making it. So I'm going to add half a cup of yogurt, just mix it all around. And the tzatziki goes so beautifully with our falafel and our kibbeh. That's great. It goes really well on if you're going to have it with pita bread. So good. And the longer that you leave those ingredients, the longer that they sit together, the more that they'll absorb the flavours. Will develop the flavours. That's super easy. My falafel is not doing what it's meant to be doing, so it's not forming together. So I'm adding a little bit of flour, about 2 tablespoons of flour. And I'm hoping that is going to be good to me. Now that looks better already. All right, so I've got my falafel. I'm trying to show everybody everything so that we can, so that you can do some of it and then you can finish off on your own. Oh, here we go. That's better. All right, great. So my mixture, I needed to add 2 tablespoons of flour. So I just plain flour. And then I'm making them into balls. And depending if you want to deep fry them, if you want to deep fry them, you can make them into round balls. If you want to shallow fry them or bake them in the oven, and there are 3 different ways you can do it, then I suggest that you make a patty like that shape. So ideally, when you pick up a lump of mixture, it should basically hold its shape. If it doesn't, add a little bit of plain flour. So I added 2 tablespoons to my mixture. And that gives it a little bit more firmness. And then I'm going to start forming my balls here. Perfect. All right, so I've made mine, yay, and they smell, oh, they smell so good. I'm going to pop mine in the fridge and I'm going to grab my kibbeh out. I'm using some canola oil today. You could use sunflower oil, you could use rice bran oil, something that's light flavoured. Literally just stay there. Oh, here we go. Oh, beautiful. Oh, perfect. There you go. The recipe says they should cook for about 5 minutes. I'm just moving mine to make sure that they... The last one in. I'm watching my oil, I'm watching the time. So I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying right next to my oil. If you're going to air fry, I mean, you'll probably know more about this, Sophie, than I do, but you've got to spray the outside of your kibbeh to give it a little bit of, well, something to cook it in. Separate so that because I like to multitask and sometimes I make mistakes when I multitask. Look at that. Oh, they look incredible. They haven't broken apart. They look fantastic. So I'm being super careful. I'm using my slotted spoon to put them into the oil so that I don't splash. I don't want to splash anything. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If it doesn't work every time, we don't want to do it. Right, there we go. So delicious. I'm so happy with those. Perfect. I'm going to turn my oil off just for the moment. I've had my falafel in the freezer and I'm going to try deep frying them. I'll just deep fry a couple. I'm not particularly confident that I've let them sit for long enough, but anyway, we'll give it a go. And then I'll show you how to shallow fry because I know that these work really well, shallow frying. Because if we don't leave them long enough, what happens is they'll disintegrate in the frying. Whereas when you shallow fry, that's never a problem. Okay, here we go. These ones have worked beautifully. All right, so that's deep frying them and they've worked out beautifully. I was a bit worried that wasn't going to work. I'm going to show you how to shallow fry the rest of them. So shallow frying, exactly the same thing as you do with the kibbeh as well.